For 12 years, I believed I had built something unshakable. My marriage to Lisa was the cornerstone of my life, a partnership forged in love, ambition, and mutual respect, or so I thought. We met in college, both of us young and full of promise, driven by the idea that success would follow those who worked hard enough for it. I was determined to build a stable future, and she was eager to share in the journey. By the time we were 30, I had carved out a comfortable life for us. My career in finance was solid, and while we weren't wealthy, we never struggled. Lisa had initially pursued a career in marketing, but gradually let go of her ambitions. She wasn't lazy, just easily discouraged. Every time she hit a roadblock, she would shift gears, searching for something easier, something more fulfilling. Eventually, she decided to stay home, handling our social calendar, decorating the house, and indulging in the luxury of time. I never complained. I wanted her to be happy, and I could afford to give her that. We lived in a spacious suburban home, just far enough from the city to feel peaceful, but close enough that we could pretend we still belonged to the fast-paced world we had once been part of. Lisa loved entertaining. She thrived on being the perfect hostess, throwing dinner parties and planning weekend getaways for our small circle of friends. I always admired how effortlessly she made everything seem, how she could charm a room, how she could make people feel welcome. I thought I knew her completely. And then there was Mark. Mark had been my best friend since childhood. We had grown up together, survived awkward teenage years, and navigated adulthood side by side. He had always been the charismatic one, the one with natural confidence and an easy way of drawing people in. I admired him in many ways. While I had built my life through careful planning and discipline, Mark had stumbled into success. He was smart but never overly ambitious, lucky but never ungrateful. His wealth came not from grueling effort, but from a series of well-timed business ventures, the kind of success that seemed to fall into his lap. Lisa liked Mark. They got along well, but then again, Lisa got along with everyone. I had never given their friendship a second thought. After all, Mark was like a brother to me, someone I trusted without question. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle shifts, the way Lisa's laughter lingered a little longer when Mark was around, the way she seemed more engaged in conversations when he was speaking. But love makes you blind, and trust makes you foolish. For now, I still believed I had everything. A wife who adored me, a best friend who stood by my side, and a life most people would envy. But illusions never last forever. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moments when things started to shift, though at the time, I ignored them. When you trust someone completely, your mind refuses to entertain the idea of betrayal. It finds explanations, reasonable justifications, anything but the truth. Lisa had always been attentive, but something about her changed over the years. It was subtle at first, the way she became more restless, as if the life we had built wasn't enough anymore. She started spending more time on social media, scrolling through curated snapshots of people with extravagant vacations, designer wardrobes, and luxury cars. She'd make passing comments about how Mark always seemed to be traveling, how his house was twice the size of ours, how his life seemed so effortless. I didn't think much of it. After all, who didn't daydream about a more glamorous life? I had always been pragmatic, content with stability over excess. But Lisa wasn't wired that way. She wanted more excitement, more luxury, more attention. The first real sign came at one of our dinner parties. Mark had just bought a new sports car, and he showed up looking every bit the successful entrepreneur. Sharp suit, expensive watch, exuding the confidence of a man who had everything he wanted. Lisa was mesmerized. She laughed at his jokes a little too freely, leaned in a little too close when he spoke. I dismissed it as harmless. Mark had that effect on people. But then she started mentioning him more often. Little comments about how Mark always knew the best restaurants, how he had an eye for quality, how he seemed to have figured out the secret to life. She would compare things, our vacations to his, our home to his, our lifestyle to his. I told myself it was normal. Everyone compares. Then she changed. It started with the way she carried herself, her posture, the way she dressed, the way she paid more attention to how she looked. She started going to the gym more often, spending money on expensive skincare routines, and buying new clothes that didn't fit the life we had but rather the one she seemed to want. She insisted she was just trying to take better care of herself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was preparing for something. Our conversations felt different. She was distracted, disinterested, responding with absent-minded nods when I talked about my day. When we spent time together, it felt obligatory rather than natural. The warmth we once shared was cooling, turning into something distant and polite, like two people coexisting rather than truly living together. I chalked it up to routine. People change over time, I told myself. Maybe we had just fallen into a rut. I had been working longer hours, making sure we were financially secure, and maybe in doing so, I had neglected her in ways I hadn't realized. So, I tried harder. I planned date nights. I surprised her with small gifts, little reminders of the life we had built together. I made an effort to talk, to connect. But the harder I tried, the more she pulled away. She would smile, say the right words, but there was something behind her eyes, something cold, something calculating. And Mark was always there, always just close enough to be part of our world without raising suspicion. I didn't see it then. I thought he was just my best friend, the same man who had been there through everything. But now, when I think about those months, I see it clearly. I see how Lisa would light up around him in a way she never did with me anymore. I see the way his presence made her feel alive, the way his success made her crave something more than what I could give her. At the time, I refused to believe anything was wrong. But deep down, I think I already knew. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. There's something cruel about realizing your marriage is slipping through your fingers and being unable to stop it. It's like watching a slow-motion car crash. You see every moment unfold, but you're powerless to change the outcome. Lisa was becoming a stranger in our home. The woman who once kissed me goodbye every morning now barely acknowledged my presence as I left for work. She was always busy. Busy with errands, busy with social events, busy with anything that gave her an excuse to be away from me. I told myself I was overthinking things. Relationships go through phases. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was feeling restless, and it had nothing to do with me. So, I gave her space. I stopped trying to plan romantic evenings. I stopped asking what was on her mind. I let her drift, hoping she would find her way back to me. She didn't. Instead, she started going out more. She had a new friend group, people she had met at the gym, or so she said. They were always going to expensive restaurants, boutique cafes, places that seemed out of step with the lifestyle we had always lived. Lisa had always loved nice things, but lately, she seemed obsessed with luxury. She would come home late, smelling of wine and perfume that wasn't hers, her laughter feeling distant and hollow. When I asked about it, she would smile and say, "You're working all the time anyway. What else am I supposed to do? Sit at home alone?" That comment stung. I had been working harder, but it was for us. It was always for us. I thought she understood that. And Mark, he was always nearby. Not in an obvious way, but in the way that made it impossible to ignore. If Lisa wasn't with her so-called friends, she was at some event that Mark had invited her to. They were running in the same circles now, moving in a world of high-end restaurants and private parties that I had never been interested in. I should have questioned it sooner. I should have asked why my wife suddenly had so much in common with a man who had always lived a completely different kind of life than we did. But I didn't. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. Then, there was the night that finally made me realize something was deeply wrong. I had been working late, trying to get ahead on a big project. I texted Lisa to ask if she wanted me to pick up dinner, but she didn't respond. It wasn't unusual lately, so I let it go. Around 10 p.m., I came home, expecting to find her in bed, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be tired so she wouldn't have to talk to me. She wasn't there. Her car was gone. There was no note, no text, nothing. My stomach twisted in a way that felt unnatural, like my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. I sat on the couch, waiting. Minutes turned into hours. At 1:30 a.m., I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't move. I just listened. The door opened quietly, and she walked in like someone who didn't want to be caught. I heard her heels click against the tile as she tiptoed to our bedroom. My heart pounded. I wanted to confront her, to ask where she had been, but I hesitated. Maybe I didn't want to hear the answer. Instead, I waited until the morning. Over breakfast, I asked casually, "You got in late last night. Where were you?" She barely looked up from her coffee. "Oh, just out with the girls." The lie was effortless. She didn't know that I had checked her social media. She had posted a story earlier in the evening. Pictures of cocktails, a dimly lit restaurant, a caption about girls' night. But one of the photos had caught my eye. A reflection in the glass. A blurred silhouette sitting across from her. It wasn't one of her friends. It was Mark. I didn't say anything then. I needed proof. I needed to be sure. But deep down, I knew. Lisa wasn't my wife anymore. She had already left me in her heart. I just didn't know it yet. The moment you realize you've been betrayed is unlike anything else. It's not just pain. It's a cold, creeping numbness that spreads through your entire body. It's the death of something sacred, the shattering of trust, the unraveling of every moment you thought was real. And I knew. I knew the night I saw Mark's reflection in that restaurant window. I knew when Lisa lied to my face without hesitation. I knew when I looked into her eyes and saw nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, just the casual confidence of someone who had already decided I wasn't worth the truth. But knowing isn't enough. Knowing doesn't give you closure. It doesn't let you walk away with your dignity intact. I needed proof, something undeniable. So, I started watching. I didn't change my routine. I still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, still pretended to believe her when she told me she was meeting her friends. But now, I was paying attention. I was watching for the moments I had ignored before. The way she would check her phone and smile to herself. The way she seemed more invested in her appearance before going out. The way she always had an excuse ready before I could even ask where she had been. Then came the moment that removed all doubt. One evening, I told Lisa I had to work late. It was a lie. I left the house as usual, drove a few blocks away, and parked on a side street. Then I waited. At first, nothing happened. An hour passed. 2. Then, just before 8 p.m., Lisa left. She wasn't dressed casually. She wasn't in the usual jeans and a sweater she wore when she went out with her friends. She was wearing a sleek black dress, heels that made her legs look longer, makeup that was meant to impress. She looked beautiful. She looked like she was going on a date. And I was right. I followed her, keeping my distance. It felt surreal, like I was outside of my own body, watching a scene unfold in someone else's life. But it wasn't. It was mine. She drove to an upscale hotel downtown. Not a bar. Not a restaurant. A hotel. I watched from my car as she walked through the entrance, her posture confident, her head held high. She didn't hesitate. She belonged there. She knew exactly where she was going. I didn't need to see anything else. I already knew who she was meeting. Mark. My best friend. The man I had trusted with everything. The man who had stood beside me at my wedding, who had toasted to my happiness, who had promised, in front of everyone we loved, that he would always be there for me. I should have been furious. I should have stormed into that hotel, demanded answers, made a scene. But I didn't. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, feeling my world collapse in slow motion. I drove home before she did. When she finally returned, past midnight, she barely even tried to hide it. She walked into the house like nothing had happened, kissed me on the cheek, and went straight to bed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling nothing. She had made her choice. She just hadn't told me yet. Once you know the truth, every interaction becomes an unbearable performance. Every smile, every kiss, every word feels like a twisted mockery of what once was. Lisa still played the role of my wife, but I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just an obstacle, something in the way of the life she wanted. After that night, I withdrew. I stopped trying to reach her, stopped pretending I didn't see the way she checked her phone with anticipation, the way she sighed when she thought I wasn't listening. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to confront her, but the truth was, I wasn't ready. I still wanted to believe she would come back to me, but she didn't. The nights she came home late grew more frequent. At first, she had made an effort to lie, saying she was with friends, that she had lost track of time. But as the weeks passed, she stopped making excuses. She stopped caring whether I noticed. Then came the whispers. People talk. No matter how careful they thought they were, No matter how much they convinced themselves they were discreet, the world has a way of revealing secrets. It started at work, passing comments from coworkers who had seen Lisa and Mark together. Nothing direct, just offhand remarks that planted seeds of doubt. I saw your wife at the Oakwood the other night. Looked like she was having a great time. Man, Mark's been spending a lot of time with Lisa, huh? You're lucky to have a friend who gets along so well with your wife. Then it was the neighbors, side glances, hesitant pauses in conversations, as if they weren't sure whether to say something. And then, worst of all, one of Lisa's closest friends, Danielle, called me. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to pick up. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice uneasy. It's about Lisa. I didn't react. I had been preparing for this moment. I know. A long silence. You know? She finally asked. I know. I'm so sorry. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Everyone's talking. She's not even trying to hide it. I thought maybe she told you, or that you were okay with it, or... I ended the call before she could finish. That was the moment it all sank in. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was public. I was the fool. The man everyone pitied. The husband who had no control over his own marriage. Lisa hadn't just abandoned me. She had humiliated me. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom while she was out, knowing exactly where she was, exactly who she was with. And I finally let the anger in. For months, I had tried to reason with myself, tried to hold on to the illusion that I could fix this, that I could make her love me again. But there was nothing left to save. She had already chosen Mark. The only thing left was for me to decide what I would do next. There comes a moment in every broken relationship when the truth no longer needs to be spoken. It lingers in the air, heavy and suffocating, pressing down until one person finally decides to let go. For months, Lisa had been pulling away, testing the limits of my patience, of my silence. And now, she didn't need to hide anymore. She had already won. The confrontation I had rehearsed in my mind never happened. I had imagined demanding answers, forcing her to look me in the eye and admit what she had done. I had pictured her crying, begging, making excuses. But in the end, there were no grand declarations, no dramatic fights. Lisa made her decision the way she had lived her life, quietly, selfishly, without looking back. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I came home from work to find suitcases by the door. Not all of her things, just enough for her to leave comfortably. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, not even pretending to be upset. When she saw me, she smiled, a sad little smile, as if she expected me to be heartbroken. I wasn't. I just stood there, staring at the life we had built together, reduced to a few packed bags and an empty house. I think we both knew this was coming, she said, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I need something different, something more, she continued. You understand, don't you? I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Understand? What was there to understand? That the woman I had loved, the woman I had sacrificed for, had traded a life of loyalty and security for a man with a bigger house and a flashier car? That she had spent months lying to my face while she made her exit strategy? Lisa didn't leave because of some deep emotional disconnect, some irreparable fracture in our marriage. She left because she wanted a life of luxury, because she saw Mark as her golden ticket. And I saw it in her eyes, that quiet certainty, that unwavering confidence that she was making the right choice. She wasn't sad. She wasn't conflicted. She was relieved. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. Go. She hesitated, as if she expected me to put up a fight. Maybe she wanted me to. Maybe she wanted the satisfaction of knowing she had broken me. But I had no more tears left to shed for her. Lisa picked up her bags, slung her purse over her shoulder, and walked past me. She didn't turn back. She didn't offer a final apology, a last goodbye. And just like that, she was gone. I stood in the empty living room for a long time, listening to the silence she had left behind. The woman I had built my life around had walked away without a second thought. But she had no idea that the life she was running toward was already crumbling beneath her feet. She had chosen Mark, and soon, she would realize she had chosen wrong. The first night without Lisa was the quietest night of my life. I sat in the dark, staring at the empty space where her things used to be, feeling neither sadness nor relief, just a strange, numbing emptiness. I thought I would feel free, finally unburdened from the weight of her betrayal. But there was no sense of victory. There was only the echo of what had been, the ghost of a life I had spent over a decade building. For the first few weeks, I went through the motions. I woke up, went to work, came home, and repeated the cycle. The house was colder now, even though nothing had changed. It wasn't just the absence of Lisa. It was the absence of the illusion, the lie I had been living in for so long. Word spread quickly. You can't hide something like this in a tight social circle. Friends, neighbors, even distant acquaintances had heard that Lisa had left me for Mark. The pity in their eyes made me sick. Some people were kind, offering quiet condolences, while others, men who had probably envied me before, just shook their heads, muttering about how they always knew Lisa had a wandering eye. I hated them all, not because they were wrong, but because I had been the last to see it. Mark, on the other hand, had no shame. Barely a month had passed before he and Lisa were parading their new relationship in public, attending parties together, making appearances at the same restaurants we had once visited as a couple. They wanted to be seen. Lisa wanted the world to know she had upgraded, that she was living the life she had always deserved. But it wasn't enough for her to leave me. She had to erase me completely. She unfollowed me on social media, deleted our photos, changed her last name back to her maiden name within weeks, as if she couldn't shed my presence fast enough. Our shared history meant nothing to her. Mark, my so-called best friend, didn't reach out. Not a call, not a message, not even a half-hearted attempt to justify what he had done. I didn't expect an apology. He had never been the type to feel guilt. But the silence between us wasn't just betrayal. It was a declaration. He had one. Or at least, that's what he thought. Because while Lisa had left me for a man with more money, she had failed to understand one simple, undeniable truth. Wealth is not a foundation. It is not love. It is not stability. It is not permanence. And Mark's fortune, her real reason for choosing him, was about to slip through his fingers. She had made her choice. And soon, she would regret it. At first, Lisa's new life seemed perfect. She had the luxury, the status, the excitement she had always craved. With Mark, she had traded in quiet stability for something flashier, something that made her feel important. She had no regrets. Until the cracks started to show. Mark had always been lucky. His wealth wasn't built on careful planning or hard work. It was built on high-risk ventures and well-timed investments. He spent money as easily as he made it, never worrying about what might happen if luck stopped favoring him. And then, one day it did. It started with whispers in his business circles, risky deals that didn't pay off, investments that turned to dust overnight. At first, he dismissed it as temporary, a setback, nothing more. But the losses kept piling up. He was bleeding money faster than he could replace it. And Lisa? She noticed. Their extravagant nights out became fewer. The expensive gifts stopped. The carefree spending slowed to a cautious trickle. And for the first time, she began to understand the truth. She hadn't built a life with Mark. She had gambled on him. And now, she was losing. The downward spiral was brutal. Mark's debts caught up with him. Lawsuits followed. One of his businesses folded completely, taking a significant chunk of his fortune with it. He sold his sports car first, then his second home, then finally, the mansion that Lisa had once paraded through as if it were her palace. I heard about it all through mutual acquaintances. The same people who had once whispered about my humiliation were now whispering about Mark's downfall. He's completely wiped out. Lisa must be losing her mind. She left a man who would have taken care of her forever for a guy who can barely keep himself afloat. And just like that, the woman who had abandoned me for a life of luxury was watching that very life slip through her fingers. I should have felt satisfied. I should have laughed at the poetic justice of it all. But all I felt was a quiet, detached sense of inevitability. Lisa had never loved Mark. She had loved what he represented. And now, he had nothing left to give her, which meant it was only a matter of time before she came back to me. I didn't have to wait long. I knew it was coming. The moment Mark's fortune crumbled, I could already predict Lisa's next move. She wasn't the kind of woman who could survive without comfort, without security. She had never been self-sufficient, never learned how to stand on her own. She had always needed someone to provide for her. And now that Mark was no longer that person, she only had one place left to turn. Me. It started small, just a text, a simple "Hey, how have you been?" As if she hadn't walked out on our marriage, as if she hadn't torn my life apart for something she thought was better. I didn't respond. A few days later, she sent another. "I was thinking about you today. I miss talking to you." Miss me? She hadn't given me a second thought when she was wrapped in Mark's world, living the life she believed she deserved. But now that reality had crashed down around her, she wanted to remember me. I ignored that one too. Then she showed up. It was a rainy evening when I heard the knock at my door. I already knew who it was before I even stood up. When I opened it, there she was, Lisa, standing in the dim light, her once pristine appearance now slightly undone. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were tired. Her clothes were stylish, but she looked smaller somehow, less confident. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I said nothing, just leaned against the doorframe, watching her squirm under the weight of my silence. "I made a mistake," she continued. I thought I wanted something else, but I see things so much clearer now. What we had, it was real. It was solid. I didn't appreciate it when I had it." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Now she saw it? Now, after betraying me, after leaving me for my best friend, after throwing away everything we had built together? Now, when her perfect new life had gone up in flames, she wanted to come home. She reached for my arm, her touch hesitant. "I miss you." I pulled back. "You miss what I gave you, Lisa. You miss the stability, the safety. You don't miss me. You miss what I could provide." Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe they were real. Maybe they weren't. It didn't matter. "Please," she whispered. "Can't we just talk?" I straightened, gripping the edge of the door. I looked her in the eyes, making sure she understood every word I was about to say. "Go home, Lisa. Wherever that is now. It's not here." And with that, I shut the door in her face. She had made her choice, and now she would live with it. Closing the door on Lisa should have felt like the final victory, the moment where everything came full circle. But as I stood in the silence of my home, listening to the sound of her footsteps retreating down the porch, I realized something. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like the inevitable conclusion to something that had already been dead for a long time. Lisa was gone. Mark was ruined. And I was finally free. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The weight of betrayal, of humiliation, of heartbreak. It had been suffocating me for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to exist without it pressing down on my chest. But now, there was nothing left to fight, nothing left to wait for. The past was behind me. And the future? That was mine again. The people in our social circle, the same ones who had once pitted me, now looked at me with a kind of quiet respect. They saw Lisa for what she was. They saw Mark for what he had become. And they saw me, the man who had been left behind, only to rise again. Some of them reached out. Old friends, colleagues, even acquaintances who had heard the story. They wanted to talk, to check in. Some offered sympathy, others congratulated me for standing my ground. I accepted their kindness, but I didn't dwell on it. I didn't need validation. I had already won. Lisa, on the other hand, wasn't doing well. After I rejected her, she had tried to latch onto someone else. Another man, another savior. But word spreads fast, and her reputation had followed her. People knew what she had done. They knew how quickly she had abandoned me for Mark, how easily she had discarded loyalty for wealth. And now that Mark was nothing, she had nothing. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. There was no more anger left in me, no more bitterness, just a quiet sense of closure. Lisa and Mark had thought they were playing a game, that life was about chasing the next best thing, about stepping over the people who had loved them in order to climb higher. But they had played themselves. And I was just getting started. For the first time in years, my life was mine again. No shadows of betrayal lurking in the corners, No weight of someone else's selfish choices dragging me down. Just silence. Just peace. Lisa never reached out again after that night. Maybe she finally understood that some doors, once closed, can never be reopened. Maybe she was too ashamed. Or maybe she had already moved on, looking for another man to build her life around. It didn't matter. She was nothing more than a name in my past now. Mark was a ghost, too. Once, he had been my best friend, the person I had trusted with everything. Now, he was just a cautionary tale, a reminder that not all friendships are meant to last. After his financial collapse, he tried to recover, tried to rebuild what he had lost. But trust, once broken, is hard to regain. His business connections turned their backs on him, the same way he had turned his back on me. I heard rumors that he moved away, that he was trying to start over somewhere new. I didn't care enough to confirm. Whatever happened to him, whatever life he ended up with, it was out of my hands. As for me, I took my time. I didn't rush to fill the empty spaces Lisa had left behind. Instead, I embraced the solitude, the freedom. I focused on myself, on my work, on the things I had neglected while trying to keep my marriage alive. And slowly, I started living again. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I went to the gym, picked up new hobbies, allowed myself to enjoy life without the constant fear of betrayal hanging over me. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was free. One night, months later, I was at a cafe, sipping my coffee and flipping through a book, when someone sat down at the table across from me. She was a stranger. She had kind eyes. She smiled. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled back. The past was over. And the future? It was mine again.